The Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and District of Columbia will now come to order. The first order of business today, the Subcommittee is meeting to mark up H.R. 626, the Federal Employees Paid Parental Leave Act of 2009. The Subcommittee will now consider H.R. 626 to provide that 4 of the 12 weeks of parental leave made available to a federal employee shall be paid leave and for other purposes, which was first introduced by Carolyn Maloney of New York on January 22nd, 2009. Without objection, the chair and ranking minority member will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Good morning. Before I get to the subject of this bill, I do want to acknowledge that to my left, Tanya Shand, who has been the Chief of Staff for the current majority for the past 10 years, has just accepted a position with the Obama administration. And Tanya has been a dynamo on this committee for, as I say, 10 years. And she has helped me greatly in transitioning in as the new chairman here. She has done yeoman's work here as the Chief of Staff for the committee. And she has served everyone wonderfully, both minority and majority members, and especially those whose business was brought before this committee in any matter. She is one of the finest public servants that I have met in my life as a public servant, and I regret that she is leaving to join the administration. However, I think that President Obama has once again chosen very wisely, and I wish her the greatest success in her next endeavor, which is to work over at OPM as a liaison with Congress. So congratulations and thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope this hearing goes well in the markup.
All right, on to business. I'd like to welcome the ranking member, Mr. Chavitz, and first address the business meeting of the 111th Congress. Today we meet to mark up H.R. 626, the Federal Employee Paid Parental Leave Act of 2009. H.R. 626, as I mentioned, will allow all federal and congressional employees to receive 4 weeks of leave with full pay and benefits for the birth or adoption of a child. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who has been a champion of this cause. She's the representative from New York and introduced H.R. 626 back in January. During the last Congress, Representative Maloney had introduced H.R. 5781, a predecessor bill, which provided 8 weeks of paid parental leave. However, as a compromise, the bill was amended in full committee to provide for 4 weeks of paid parental leave. As a matter of record, the United States is far behind other industrial nations in offering paid leave for parents. 168 countries offer guaranteed paid leave to women in connection with childbirth. 98 of these countries offer 14 or more weeks paid leave. The U.S. guarantees no paid leave for mothers in any segment of the workforce, and there are 66 countries that ensure fathers either receive paid leave or have a right to paid parental leave. The United States has understood the need to have some sort of leave policy for families for some time. And in 1993, Congress enacted the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, which added 12 weeks of job-protected leave for the birth or adoption of a child. While this unpaid leave helped millions of families, many employees have been unable to take advantage of that time off to care for a new child or for a seriously ill loved one because they simply cannot afford to forego the pay. The need for this legislation is particularly timely. In this economic crisis, many families dependent on 2 incomes are being forced to make ends meet on only one salary. This drastically reduces the ability of workers to provide the best care for themselves and their loved ones. Rising gasoline and food prices and falling home values have made the situation even more difficult. When we pass H.R. 626, over 1 million workers in the United States will have the right to paid parental leave, and we will be setting a standard for the rest of the nation to follow, while both helping families to cope and also stimulating the economy. I now yield 5 minutes to my colleague and friend, Mr. Chaffetz, the ranking minority member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. It's an honor and a thrill and a privilege to serve in the United States Congress and as the ranking member on this committee. I'm a freshman. I'm a rookie. But nevertheless, I bring a great deal of enthusiasm and dedication to this job, and I look forward to working closely with you. I appreciate the time you've already given me in working with you, and I look forward to the various issues, important issues that face us together, and look forward to working closely with you, making sure that we do so in a spirit of just wanting to improve the United States of America. I also want to offer my congratulations to Ms. Shan. I did not have an opportunity to work with her, but the current staff director for the subcommittee's majority, obviously leaving for the Office of Personnel Management as a director for congressional relations. My congratulations to you, and congratulations. We know you're going to need all the help you can get over there, so that'll be great. I want to we have a number of concerns and challenges that are facing us, and one of these issues is obviously the bill that's before us today. I would hope that we would have had some sort of hearing. I know that this bill has been introduced in various forms since the year 2000. I think it would actually be more appropriate to have a hearing, maybe hear from some witnesses, understand the changes that were coming. It would be a good idea to take a fresh look at this legislation, maybe again, as I said, bring in some witnesses. But at this point, with my limited background and I personally have on this issue, I will not be able to support this piece of legislation. I look forward to the discussion we'll have today, and with that, I thank the chairman.
Thank you. I would now like to recognize the chief sponsor of this legislation, Ms. Carolyn Maloney of New York, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman and ranking member and my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Davis, who worked with me and led the passage of this in the prior Congress. Steny Hoyer, Leader Hoyer, has a deep interest in this bill and is supporting it, and we've worked many years on it. And to my colleague on the other side of the aisle, we've had numerous hearings over the roughly 10 years this bill is before Congress. And your prior colleague, Mr. Shays, was a prime sponsor and very active, along with many other members on the other side of the aisle. This is a very important bill to me. As the mother of 2 daughters, balancing work and family is a tremendous challenge. This is the first bill to pass since 1993 that helps working men and women balance work and family. The Family and Medical Leave Act, a very important landmark, gave unpaid leave. This would apply only to the 1.8 million employees of the federal government, but it is often the federal government that leads the country. It is a model project for the country for federal employees. Very striking and important is that 163 countries, Mr. Chairman, guarantee paid leave now. The United States does not. We are tied with Lesotho, Swaziland, and Papua New Guinea. I even wrote a book on work-family balance, and I had this stat in it. I get people calling me. They don't believe it. They look it up, and it's true. We are tied 163 in the world in terms of the support that we give to working families. Only 8% of U.S. employers offer paid leave, and the federal government is not one of them. The Federal Employees Paid Parental Leave Act will give 4 weeks of paid leave for one of the most important job in our country, the birth of a child. And the Department of Labor reported that 3.5 million workers who need leave don't take it because they cannot afford it. 78% reported that they don't take leave because they could not afford it, and they cannot to do it without a paycheck. And 96 countries mandate paid annual leave. The U.S. government does not. And 98 countries guarantee workers at least 1 day off a week, and the U.S. does not. So this is a very important bill to balance work and family. As a country that constantly talks about family values, it's a way of putting our rhetoric into the reality of help to families that are moving forward with the birth or adoption of a child. I thank all of my colleagues The federal government is the largest employer in our nation, but it lags behind the private sector on this vital work-life issue. So this bill can have a big impact. I am very grateful to you, Chairman Lynch, and I know that the women's movement is having several hearings and meetings, and I will certainly invite the ranking member and others to those. But I appreciate so much you're moving it forward, Mr. Lynch. And I thank my good friend and colleague who helped author this and worked on it for many years, Mr. Davis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Bill Bray, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as a supporter of the bill last year, I'm glad to see this come before us. I think that we need to understand, too, though, that the difference between what happens in this country and happens in other countries, that we are a federation. There are 50 states out there. There are thousands of local governments that could be doing what we're doing today. And I see this as setting an example. I think that I have supported this bill because I think these are our employees. We have the right to pass this legislation because we will bear the responsibility to pay for this benefit, which is totally different than a proposal to mandate that other agencies or other businesses have to provide the benefits that we're talking about today, because we would not then have the responsibility to pay the bills. I think that rights and responsibilities go together, and I think that one of the things the federal government ought to do more is exactly what we're doing here with the gentlelady's legislation. That's lead through example rather than do dictate. And I think this, as the largest employer, we can set the example so that other government agencies, the thousands that are across this country, and the millions of other businesses out there will follow our example. Take a look at the bottom line. Take a look at the benefits they get with having families working with their businesses, not just for their businesses, and then follow suit within their budgetary restraints. So I strongly support this legislation. I support it again because it is our responsibility to pay these bills. Thus, we have the right to be able to make this decision. And I think, again, I much prefer to lead through example than through mandate, and this bill follows that edict. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I first of all want to commend and congratulate Representative Maloney for the many years that she has actually introduced this legislation and led the fight for gender parity and developed and expressed a deep understanding of many cognitive factors that exist in our society. As I was listening to my colleagues, I was thinking of a different life and a different hat that I have worn, and that is the hat of a psychologist who had some expertise, I guess, in youth development and child development. And I thought that if we provide parents with the opportunity to seriously bond with newborns, it is amazing how much influence and impact that has on the further development of children, and in many instances could keep them out of correctional facilities, keep them out of psychiatrist offices, keep them out of counseling programs, keep them out of our judicial system, and quite frankly, save our society a tremendous amount of money, as well as a tremendous amount of grief. And so it is a cost-saving bill, in a sense, if you take the long-range view. If you take the short-range view, then it means that we're thinking of what the immediate cost might be. But I also take the position that we have to move into the century and the times in which we live. And I can't think of any particular reason that our country, this country, my country, 'tis of thee, would be behind other nations that don't have anything near the same kind of resources that we have, and yet they've found a way to provide this leave. I also thought of our staff director, who is getting ready to leave, and I want to commend and congratulate her and express deep thanks and appreciation, because I have served as either the ranking member or chairman of this committee now for a number of years. And during that entire time, she was the staff director for the Democratic side of the aisle. And I echo the sentiments expressed by Chairman Lynch that I have never found not only a more dedicated, committed, but a more knowledgeable, informed, hard-working person to work with. And so it has just been an absolute pleasure, Tanya, for me to have the opportunity to work with you during those years. And when you were off on maternity leave, although you really were not off, I mean, you were away on maternity leave, it would have been great had we had this legislation in place at that particular time. You did an outstanding job with or without it. You maintained your work ethic, even though you had other things in which to be concerned about. And so I think this bill is a testament to the strength of two women, because you actually processed it through committee, got all of the work done that we needed to get done. So it's a testament to the work of both Representative Carolyn Maloney, who introduced, championed, and stayed with it, and it's a testimony to our staff director, Tanya Shan. And Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and will very proudly vote for it and urge all of my colleagues to do so. And I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay.
Let me just say to you, Mr. Davis, thank you for your great leadership as chairman of this subcommittee. I had the great honor and pleasure to serve at your elbow, I guess, as ranking member in the last Congress, and I learned a lot by serving with you. I think that those constituents in the federal employment and working for the post office and residents of the District of Columbia were greatly served by you as chairman. And if I can fill one of your shoes, then that'll be a lot. And I just want to thank you for your very measured and thoughtful leadership of this and dynamic leadership of this subcommittee during your tenure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If I might observe.
That's right. I'd like to, Chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's a kind of an unusual moment for me because my daughter last night delivered baby girl, my second grandchild, and she had a difficult pregnancy. My granddaughter came 30 days early. She was a school teacher, and she had to struggle with, could she be on her feet? Does she need to take certain days off? Is it with pay, without pay? And all those type of challenges. Her husband is an accountant in the middle of tax season right now. His firm is struggling to how to cover all the business they have. It's not struggling financially, but it's not a good time for him to take a couple of weeks off to be with her and bond. And I say this because I think it's important to be generous, but it also needs to be flexible. And I have grave reservations about this bill. I could never support this bill, and there's two basic reasons. One is, particularly at this point in time, when people in my district can't find a job, they're losing half of their savings in many cases. To be generous with their money to government employees is a tad of an insult, quite frankly. That this isn't free money that we're kind of taking out of our pockets here. We're being generous with taxpayers who are being hammered right now to tell them that their government employees in many cases are going to get benefits that they don't get. Now, I don't believe we should mandate it in the private sector, and I believe there are a lot of reasons not, but I believe that while maybe you can get away with that argument in normal times that you should lead, I don't agree with that principle right now. We shouldn't be more generous than people who are struggling to make their house payments, to pay their health care, and struggling, and be more generous to federal employees than most Americans are. I realize big corporations have generous leave policies, but most Americans don't have that. The second part of this is the financial and the actual structure of this, because when you do this, really it's to some degree an employment policy for government employees, because when people take leave, you have to get replacement government employees, so it's a hiring policy for the federal government at no cheap cost. But in addition to that, there is the challenge of how you deal with, for example, it doesn't appear Schedule C employees are covered. Why aren't political employees covered? Are they too important? Are we saying that regular government employees are less critical positions, therefore they can afford to take leave, but boy, we want to let a Schedule C, a political appointee, take leave? And if you did let a political employee take leave, or even the career people right now in TARP, I don't particularly want a husband to take time when I'm trying to figure out how to get the leasing done for retail floor plans for RVs and autos so people can get employed, to suddenly decide he's taking a couple of weeks off to bond with his new daughter. I think sometime at the hospital, but there needs to be some flexibility in this. I don't want DEA agents and people who are in drug enforcement to suddenly disappear in the middle of a big case. I don't particularly want to try to figure out when I'm flying home every weekend whether an air traffic controller has an adequate sudden replacement on a medical leave. There are lots of challenges with this bill inside even the career employees, not even dealing with the management sections. I believe that this would be a bad bill in multiple ways, in addition to a stalking horse to mandate this in the private sector. So I'm strongly against this bill. I don't think there's any point really today to doing amendments here, but I hope we have a more complete and full debate in the full committee with lots of different amendments. One other thing, in my earlier life when I was a staff member and the non-paid parental leave bill went through, my boss supported it, and I worked in trying to come up with lots of different amendments. Unfortunately, a lot of the regulations came from different concerns I raised, both the executive branch and in the legislative process, on key employees, 50 miles apart. So now we have plants 50 miles apart, that number of employees that can be covered when you exempt small business, you do that. Well, the government's going to have the same challenges that the private sector had, even in mandated unpaid leave, yet alone this. I thank the gentleman and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I take note of the fact that in your first markup you've shown where your values are, and to very much appreciate that this bill is your first bill. I also appreciate the hearing that's going to be held today on a very important sector of not only the economy but an important agency that is suffering in these times. My good friend from New York deserves all the credit in the world for not giving up. This bill wasn't passed during good times, and it's not being passed now, as most legislation of this kind is passed. Most legislation of this kind is passed precisely at times like this. Look at when all of the New Deal legislation, for example, was passed. As for Tanya Shan, I would congratulate her as well on her new position in OPM, except to say she sure missed the mark, because if somehow she'd gotten this through last year, she could have participated in this very benefit, but she kept working. Mr. Chairman, when you consider how much rhetoric and ink has been spent on families and how little this Congress has done for families, it should bring shame on us that we have finally moved to the point where the federal government, which is supposed to lead the federal sector, is now following much of the federal sector in giving paid leave of 4 lousy weeks to new mothers after a birth. The federal government prides itself on its leadership. It's way behind in many of its benefits, which is why, as the baby boomers retire, they are not being replaced. But I see such a disconnect between those who talk the talk of families, but the moment something comes forward to do something about families, it costs too much money. Let me say why this is so important. The very people who don't want to support this now because the economy's down did not support unpaid family medical leave when the economy was up. So they've shown what their bottom line is. It's time for the federal government to finally do what it should have done decades ago, and I mean decades ago, because if we had done it decades ago, we would at least be even with every single economy, Western economy, and economy with which we compete in the world. It is a matter of great shame that it took us years to get the unpaid family medical and leave. And let me tell you who that benefits. We're very pleased to have that on the books. But if you look at who it benefits, you will see that it benefits people who already may have had some leave because they work for people like the federal government who may have had to borrow from their leave. And it benefits people, women particularly, who are the best educated and are at the top tier of the workforce. If you ask the average woman out here, don't even begin to talk about single mothers, whether or not you have had any benefit from the unpaid 12 weeks or even a few weeks, they will tell you about yourself. Because these are the parents that are running back to work, first of all, because they can't afford the time off with no money, and second, because there's no child care in this country, educational child care of the kind they have in every single country that has paid family medical leave. If the federal government doesn't step up first, how can we expect others to take care of their families? So the notion that we can't pay for it now, we couldn't pay for it when the gentle lady introduced it, when the derivatives and the rest of it were sending the economy off the top, is what you're going to hear until we get to work and pass this bill. It's urgent to pass now. It's important for the federal government to be the example that steps forward now, and it will have an important beneficial effect on the average working woman who has not benefited from unpaid family medical leave.
There being no further opening statements, I ask unanimous consent that members' written statements be included in the record without objection, so ordered. I now open H.R. 626 for consideration. Without objection, the reading of the bill will be dispensed with. And without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now move that the Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and the District of Columbia report H.R. 626 is introduced to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform with the recommendations that the bill does pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 626 to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 626 is ordered reported to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. There being no further business before the committee, we will stand in recess. Okay.
Are they all going to go that easy?
I hope.
You're just teeing me up. You're just teasing me. You're just drawing me in knowing that.
Good morning. The Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and the District of Columbia's first hearing in the 111th Congress will now come to order. I want to welcome Ranking Member Chaffetz and members of the subcommittee, hearing witnesses, and all those in attendance. Today's hearing will examine the financial stability of the United States Postal Service. The chair and the ranking member and the subcommittee members will each have 5 minutes to make an opening statement, and all members will have 3 days to submit statements for the record. Hearing no objections so ordered, I also want to note that Mr. Turner, not a member of the subcommittee, without objection and through unanimous consent, will be agreed to. It will be agreed that he will participate fully in the hearing without objection. Mr. Connolly, you had a point of order?
Not a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that on the previous vote, although it wasn't a recorded vote, that my statement was entered into the record.
Yeah, you had submitted your record, and I made a motion to enter your submission into the record. And so you
Happy to support the
voted in the
previous motion.
affirmative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Connolly. Welcome, Ranking Member Chaffetz and members and staff of the subcommittee and today's witnesses as we hold the first subcommittee hearing of the 111th Congress. I'd like to give a special welcome to the Oversight Committee Chairman, Mr. Towns, who is with us this morning, and Ranking Member Mr. Issa for joining us this morning. This hearing on the financial stability of the United States Postal Service is not only timely but critical to the American expectation of affordable 6-day mail delivery. The subcommittee will now examine the nationwide economic downturn and technological advancements that have produced declining volumes and revenues for the Postal Service. With the Postal Service facing unprecedented budget shortfalls, the subcommittee will consider a number of options to restore financial stability to the Postal Service. We will also examine ways for the Postal Service to continue to operate without cutting services. On March 20th, 2009, the Postal Service announced new efforts to cut costs. Among these plans are to close 6 of its 80 district offices, eliminate 15% of administrative staff positions across all districts, eliminate more than 1,400 mail processing supervisor and management positions, and offer voluntary retirement offer voluntary early retirement opportunities to nearly 150,000 employees. These recent announcements and new reports of the Postal Service's dire financial condition are of concern to myself, the members of this committee, and the American public. I expect that today's witnesses will offer effective and short and long-term strategies to reduce costs and improve efficiency in order to help ensure financial viability of the Postal Service. In addition, to better understand compensation at the Postal Service, I will question the Board of Governors on executives' compensation packages. Thank you, and I look forward to having a very informative hearing this morning, and at this point, I will yield to our ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz of Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. It is critical in this time. This is the first of our oversight hearings on the Postal Service and our first hearing overall. We are here today to review the lifeblood issues involving the United States Postal Service. The United States Postal Service touches everyone. There are hundreds of thousands of employees. The postal industry generates hundreds of billions of dollars as the postal system and personnel process literally hundreds of billions of letters and packages. We all need the postal system to thrive. The task at hand is enormous. In 2006, the Congress passed the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act, marked up in this committee as H.R. 22. There's now another H.R. 22 before us, which would change the way the Postal Service pre-funds retiree health care. The requirement that the United States Postal Service pre-fund the employer's portion of its future retirees' health benefits while paying premiums for current retirees is seen as an unnecessary cost burden. One thing is for sure, the United States Postal Service is in serious financial trouble. On January 28, 2009, the Government Accountability Office issued a significant study regarding the deteriorating postal finances, requiring aggressive actions to reduce costs. We must continue to do our utmost to ensure that the Postal Service is managed responsibly, effectively, and with the greatest integrity, and that we're constantly looking for savings and other ways to be creative within the Postal Service to provide maximum service to the American people as it's articulated within the United States Constitution and making sure that we are providing a service that will allow our businesses, our friendships, the personal notes that will go through the Postal Service, and that system continues to thrive. With that in mind, we must also inquire into the Postmaster General's compensation package, possible consolidation policies within the system itself, and the relocation policy in force, and other issues that will become before us. With that, I look forward to the testimony, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate being able to participate today.
Thank you. At this point, the chair would like to recognize the full committee chairman, the gentleman from Brooklyn, Mr. Towns, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lynch. Before starting my opening statement, I would like to congratulate you on becoming chairman of the important subcommittee, and thank you for your leadership and insight in holding today's hearing on the Postal Service. I also would like to congratulate the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, who, as a freshman, has already taken on an important leadership role in the House by serving as ranking member of this subcommittee. Congratulations. Today's hearing is fittingly entitled Restoring the Financial Stability of the United States Postal Service. What needs to be done? Charged with the awesome task of providing prompt, reliable, and efficient universal mailing service to all communities, businesses, and households throughout the United States and territorial areas. The United States Postal Service has certainly withstood the test of time, but the massive operational and financial challenges confronting the Postal Service are unlike any we have ever seen before. Having ended the last fiscal year with a net loss of nearly $3 billion, and that's B as in boy, the deteriorating economic condition of the United States Postal Service can no longer be ignored or deferred. With electronic communications taking more and more customers out of the lobby of the post office, coupled with the enormous contraction of the United States economy, the Postal Service is struggling to remain a financial solvent and viable entity for both now as well as in the future. Yet the question remains, how exactly will such stability be regained and, more importantly, maintained in the new and evolving 21st century economy? As mail volume decline and costs from labor, energy, and expansion in the delivery network continues to increase, the Postal Service, its union affiliates, the Congress, and the country must make some difficult decisions to get us through difficult times. And so, Mr. Chairman, it is my hope that today's witnesses will allow us to get at some of those answers and to help us determine what may have already been done to curtail costs, what innovations are currently in the works to reinvent and revive the Postal Service, and lastly, what we in Congress may need to do to restore the Postal Service's financial standings and to ensure the Postal Service's extraordinary reliability and service. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding such a timely hearing, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to have you here with us. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souter, for 5 minutes. The gentleman passes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Chairman Lynch and the ranking member, Shaftet, for allowing me to participate in today's hearing on the financial state of the United States Postal Service. I look forward to reviewing the testimony from all of today's witnesses. General Potter, I want to thank you for participating in today's hearing. In the materials we've received in preparation for today's hearing, the Postal Service has increased their long-term debt from $0 in FY 2005 to over $7 billion in FY 2008. I, along with other members of this committee, are concerned by these figures and want to work with the Postal Service to find cost savings in measures that will help maintain the viability of the Post Office in the future. That said, as some of you know, the DHL, which operated their North American operations within my congressional district, recently ceased their domestic express shipping business, leaving essentially UPS and Federal Express as private shippers in the U.S. domestic shipping market. I am concerned that this market consolidation will have an impact on costs in domestic shipping. and was hoping that during this hearing that you could comment on how this development in the private shipping markets could impact the Postal Service's ability to remain competitive. Given that the U.S. Postal Service actually contracts with private shippers for some of its delivery services, how might this consolidation in the market affect these contracts, and how might these costs result in increases overall to the Postal Service? Again, I look forward to working with you to find effective ways to helping the Postal Service remain competitive, and I'm interested in your comments concerning the consolidations in the market. Thank you.
The chairman neglected to note at the beginning of the hearing that because we have 5 panels today in this committee, we will be here very late unless we adhere very strictly to the 5-minute rule. So members will have 5 minutes to ask a question and have it answered. And when the time runs out at the end of the 5 minutes, when that light turns red, whoever is speaking may have the opportunity to complete their thought, but we're going to maintain a fairly strict 5-minute limit. Otherwise, we would be here again very, very late. At this point, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend you on your leadership and also thank you for this very timely hearing. Last week, the Postal Service announced that it was closing offices and offering early retirement to nearly 150,000 employees, almost a quarter of its workforce. The agency indicated this action was necessary because of sharply lower mail volumes due to the recession. Supported solely by mail-in and shipping revenues, not taxpayers, the Postal Service is experiencing a short-term financial crisis. I believe that Congress can act to provide some immediate breathing room at no cost to taxpayers by supporting the bill that I've co-sponsored with Representative John McHugh of New York. Our bill, H.R. 22, removes an outdated retiree health benefit mandate designed for much happier times. When we passed the PAEA, the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, the climate was a bit different then than what it is now. Times have changed. The national economy is in a recession, and there is no place more reflective of that than the economic reality that the Postal Service, which has seen a steep decline in mail volume and revenue since December of 2007. Despite declines in mail volume and revenue, the Postal Service nevertheless is obligated to cover the cost of operating an extensive network of facilities, delivery vehicles, and personnel necessary to serve the nation 6 days a week. Even with continuing extraordinary steps to cut costs, the enormous fixed cost of operating the National Mail Service threatens to overwhelm the ability of the Postal Service to operate. The aggressive approach to pre-funding future retiree health benefits that appeared doable 2 short years ago is now untenable in my estimation. I hope that this hearing will give us an opportunity to thoroughly explore the problems and difficulties being faced by what I consider to be one of our great national treasures, that is the Postal Service. Actually, this time has been coming for quite some time, and we've been putting off, delaying, deferring, not dealing with, hoping that somehow or another the inevitable we would not have to face up to. But I think the time has now come. There's unequivocally no doubt in my mind that some serious reevaluation of our Postal Service must take place, and I believe that that evaluation will begin this morning. So I want to thank you for this hearing and certainly welcome Mr. Potter.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, too. I join my colleagues in expressing our appreciation for this hearing. We hold this hearing today at a time when our national economy is struggling, and the United States Postal Service is not immune to that trend. Postmaster General John Potter, who will testify before us today, recently testified before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs that the Postal Service operated at a $2.8 billion loss for fiscal year 2008. He said the loss can be attributed largely to two factors: the unprecedented decline in mail volume due to increased use of electronic communications and other factors, and the economic recession that is affecting all sectors. Mr. Potter further outlined his plan for action to achieve fiscal solvency. In addition to raising postal rates, the Postal Service has been able to identify over $2 billion in cost reductions, ranging from consolidation and modernization of plant operations to cuts in the city delivery options. Many tough decisions have had to be made, not the least of which is a cutback of 15 million work hours in the first 2 months of this year. In addition to the 50 million work hours saved in 2008 and the 36 million work hours saved in 2007. The Postal Service's 600,000 career employees have had to face serious cutbacks to ensure the agency's viability, and we commend them for their sacrifice. Still, this may not be enough. Mr. Potter indicated in his testimony before the Senate panel that the Postal Service may have to reduce delivery service to 5 days a week rather than the current 6-day schedule. The headline-grabbing reality served as a wake-up call to the American public and to those of us in Congress who represent them. The United States Postal Service is currently the most dependable, expansive mail delivery system in the world. Ours is the only system that guarantees timely delivery to every address in the country 6 days a week without fail. That is why we must do all in our power to ensure that it continues to thrive. Some tough choices will have to be made, including both short-term solutions like that proposed by H.R. 22, which would allow the Postal Service to use its reserves to pay employee health benefits, to more long-term decisions such as cutting back work hours and service delivery. I expect that the leadership of the Postal Service will have to make some sacrifices as well, including Mr. Potter himself. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Our chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is perhaps the real moment of truth for the Postal Service and for the Congress of the United States. We have sat with you, Mr. Chairman, before you became chair, in hearing after hearing where we noted the decline of the Postal Service through, frankly, no fault of its own. Even if it were the most efficient corporation in the United States, it could not have been the same Postal Service it was when all of us were children, given competition from private carriers and particularly, and perhaps most importantly, competition from other forms of communication. We are the decline in the so-called volume of postal volume now during what we're politely calling a recession, which has taken down jobs in 50 states, has to be seen on top of what the Postal Service was already experiencing. The Postal Service had been driven into many economic efficiency moves by the factors I have named. Today, I will be interested in what further can be done in efficiencies. It's very hard to believe that the Postal Service, given what it was already up against, hadn't exhausted efficiencies. I do note that the Postal Service is like other large American corporations having to deal with health care. And I also note that health care was a major element in the takedown of the American industry that literally created the American middle class, the automobile industry. I think that somehow or the other, everybody has to look at that when it comes to this particular corporation. There's no question in my mind it could take it down. The question becomes, what do we do to keep that from happening? There may be some temporary things we can do. We have to watch out what we do. Something's got to give. I don't blame the postmaster for talking about 5-day-a-week service. I know he doesn't want to do more layoffs, but if something's got to give, we've got to find out what it is if we want to remain a country that has a national postal service. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm delighted to be here today, and welcome, Mr. Potter. Just want to note that obviously the Postal Service is struggling in this economy like everybody else, and is struggling to try to make itself a more solvent organization. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of H.R. 22, which, if enacted, we believe would save as much as $2 billion in retirement payments this year for the Postal Service. I do want to stress, however, Mr. Chairman, that just as we have seen a concern about issues like bonuses in non-performing companies or companies that can't meet their financial goals, I think the Postal Service has to look to itself in that regard as well. And I would hope this hearing would examine that. I also, as somebody who until 9 weeks ago was the head of a very large local government, I think about my own jurisdiction, the Merrifield Post Office, which serves all of Northern Virginia, or most of Northern Virginia. Ours got changed with almost no communication to local governments. And so I would hope that as we explore in this hearing the operations of the Postal Service, we can also talk about improving communication with our local officials so that if there are changes contemplated, there's an advance notification and the opportunity for some kind of dialogue before those changes are effectuated and having to be absorbed and explained by local officials who had nothing to do with those changes. So I look forward to this hearing, Mr. Chairman. I may be in and out because we're marking up the budget committee today, the budget today in the budget committee. But I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this hearing.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. I just want to welcome the Postmaster General and express my support for the Postal Service in H.R. 22. Likewise, I'm in a markup in another committee meeting, but to note their bravery through the anthrax attacks and their efforts to get the job done in rural areas and all across our country, and my support for working with you in this hearing and for more solutions to make the Postal Service more efficient and to be supportive of the workers and their important contribution to our country. Thank you.
Thank you. The committee will now hear testimony from today's witnesses. It is the committee policy that all witnesses are sworn in. I invite Mr. Potter to please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Let the record show that the witness has responded in the affirmative. Welcome, Mr. Potter. Mr. John E. Potter, Postmaster General and CEO of the United States Postal Service, was named 72nd Postmaster General of the United States of America on June 1st, 2001. He currently sits on the Postal Service Board of Governors and is Vice Chairman of the International Post Corporation, an association of 23 national posts in Europe, North America, and the Asia Pacific. Welcome, Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Congressman Chaffetz and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here representing the hard-working men and women of the United States Postal Service to discuss the financial challenges facing our great institution. We're working hard to serve America, and we're proud of our accomplishments. For example, in 2008, service and customer satisfaction reached record levels. Employee satisfaction hit an all-time high, as workplace accidents were at an all-time low. For the 5th straight year, the Postal Service was rated the most trusted federal agency and one of the 10 most trusted organizations in America. We reduced our cost by over $2 billion. Let me assure you that we're concerned about the future and we're investing in the future. We're modernizing our website, adding new automated equipment, introducing next-generation barcodes to improve efficiency, and we're using the pricing flexibility from the Postal Act of 2006 to grow mail volume. But despite these positive efforts, a diversion of mail to electronic communications and the severe contraction of the economy have left the Postal Service in a very precarious position. Over the years, first-class mail volume has declined due to the diversion to the Internet. This has been somewhat offset by growth in advertising and other mail. However, ad mail produces less revenue per piece than first-class mail. This, combined with a growing number of delivery addresses, has caused our entire organization to focus on productivity to close the revenue gap. We've taken billions in dollars of costs out of our base, and we've done that for the past 8 years. None of us, though, anticipated the dramatic downturn in the economy. By the end of this fiscal year, mail volume is projected to fall by more than 30 billion pieces from 2007 levels, the equivalent of $12 billion in lost revenue. Our people have responded heroically. We're working together with our unions and management associations. We plan to reduce costs by $5.9 billion this year alone. To make this happen, we've instituted a nationwide hiring freeze. We're consolidating operations, using fewer machines on fewer work shifts in fewer facilities with fewer mail carriers. We're eliminating thousands of administrative and supervisory positions, and we're offering voluntary early retirement to 150,000 employees. And despite these unprecedented efforts, and based on current volume projections, we'll come up approximately $6 billion short of breaking even this year. Even with a cash carryover of $1.4 billion and an ability to borrow $3 billion from the Treasury, we will still run out of cash with approximately $1.6 billion in obligations that we cannot meet this year. And I know that the House cares very much about the Postal Service. That's why I'm urgently requesting that you enact H.R. 22, introduced by Representatives John McHugh and Danny Davis of this subcommittee, and co-sponsored by over 200 members of Congress. H.R. 22 would permit the Postal Service to pay its share of health benefit costs for current retirees from our Retiree Health Benefit Trust Fund, which today has a balance of $32 billion. The Postal Service contributes more than $5 billion to that fund each year. H.R. 22 addresses our critical cash flow. But we also need to be prudent and look ahead. Mail has helped build this great nation, but with the decline in mail volume, even with the decline in mail volume, we remain a conduit for $1 trillion in commerce. And a strong Postal Service will, we cannot put a Postal Service at risk. But our law limits our ability to act and adjust to changes in mail use when it comes to pricing, delivery frequency, the number of post offices, and the type of products that we can offer. These restrictions will put our post at risk if we don't step up and change them. The time for change is now. That's why I'm engaging all our stakeholders, consumers, mailers, industry and employee groups, the Congress, the PRC, and others, in a dialogue about how we can keep the Postal Service strong. It will require structural changes to match our service levels with the changing demand. The demand for mail delivery reached a peak of 5.9 pieces of mail delivered to each address in 2000. Today, we're delivering 4.7 pieces of mail. Given this trend, I believe the Postal Service Board of Governors needs the flexibility to change delivery frequency from 6 to 5 days. This would help us reconfigure our operation in line with today's demand, keeping rates affordable. We cannot lose sight of the fact that our customers pay the costs of our services. We are not funded by congressional appropriations. We have to find the right balance between service and affordability, and we have to do all we can to avoid having the burden of long-term retiree costs fall on taxpayers. By taking the necessary actions today, I believe we can accomplish both. There is a path to success. I remain bullish on the mail. I'm convinced that mail volume will grow as the economy grows. The mail is important to America. I'm convinced it's a key to helping the economy grow. A viable Postal Service requires change. We are pushing the boundaries of change within the Postal Service, and with your support, we can modify the law to assure a strong and bright future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Let me begin the questioning. Before I do, we have invited members to submit their questions in writing for those who are unable to attend, and I'd like to enter into the record the questions for the record on behalf of Representative Jose Serrano before this committee, with unanimous consent, I'll enter those into the record. Mr. Potter, let me get right to one issue that is probably uncomfortable for you and for myself as well, and that is the matter of your salary and compensation. Let me broaden that out. There have been some reports in the press that, when you dig into the facts, and not necessarily reflective of an accurate assessment of your compensation. But we in our districts, myself with a heavy postal population in my district, have been confronted with this. Well, I'll tell you exactly. I was at the Stop and Shop the other night, and an older gentleman, a retiree of the post office, confronted me, as my constituents are sometimes want to do, and said, "Let me get this straight, Congressman. You paid CEO Potter $800,000 to lose $3 billion last year. Couldn't we get somebody to do that job for less?" That was basically how they laid it on me. I try to explain our position and yours, but I want to give you a full opportunity to do that. Given today's environment, and I'm sure you're aware of the whole situation with AIG and bonuses and going to Merrill Lynch, in this environment, in these difficult financial times, can the Postal Service justify your compensation package, which I'd like you to clarify? I'm sure it's been exaggerated. I've already looked at the numbers here, but I want you to basically tell us what your compensation package represents, and how it's broken down. I want you to inform the committee at least your side of the story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first, let me talk about elements of this $800,000 plus number. The first element that I believe probably shouldn't be there in terms of compensation is the fact that I have a security detail, which is attributed as a revenue to me or paid to me of some $66,000. That service was performed by the United States Postal Inspection Service. So that's an element of my pay. My base pay, as prescribed by law, is up to 120% of the Vice President's salary. Prior to the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, it was much less. It was, the equivalent of...
Postmaster General, is there a historic reason why your pay was tied to the Vice President of the United States? I don't see any similarity in responsibilities. Not to reflect poorly on either one of you, but...
No, I'm just describing what it is, and the rationale was the Congress's, not mine.
I see.
Okay? I was not imploring people for a pay raise. The Board of Governors had asked the Congress and for additional flexibility to hire and retain talent in the Postal Service. So again, by law, my pay is $263,575. And as a result of me being a career employee at my age, every year that I stay, I get 2% additional credit in the civil service retirement system.
How long have you been in that system?
I've been in that system since 1978, so almost 31 years.
Okay.
And so each year that I stay, I get an extra 2% in my pay. In addition to that, since I'm not 55 yet, every year I stay, there's 2% of a penalty that would accrue if I were to leave early. And so automatically every year I stay, there's a 4% growth in terms of my pension. And the other thing that drives the pension is a 3-year high for employees. They take an average of your top 3 years' pay. And since I got such a steep increase in pay as a result of the law, it produces, in terms of pension over the course of my life, a value of some $300 plus thousand.
I only have about 30 seconds left, and I got to hold myself to the same rule.
Okay.
The bonus. You have a statute that I reviewed that says your pay is basically equal to, your salary is equal to the Vice President's $263,000 or something like that, and then I see you get $130-something thousand in a bonus, and quite frankly, last year they lost, the post office lost $3 billion.
Well, that was an incentive payment. It was tied to goals agreed to between myself and the Board of Governors. The things that drove the incentive pay were service performance was a major element, and obviously we set record levels. Employee satisfaction, accidents at record low, employee satisfaction at record high, customer satisfaction at record levels. And I think there was a recognition by the Board of Governors that I wasn't in control of the economy, and that we did eliminate 50 million work hours.
All right, I'm going to hold myself to the same rule, and I'm going to yield and recognize the ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz, for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Potter, for being here. My congratulations and hats off to the entire postal community for the great savings and efficiency that were accomplished under your watch and with the great work with literally thousands and thousands of others. So congratulations for that. Obviously, this committee is Oversight and Government Reform, and while we need to talk about some of the huge, massive changes that need to happen in order to put the Postal Service back into the black, I do feel compelled to ask you about a report that was brought to my attention just a very short time ago. I need to ask you about this. On March 19th, 2009, there was a report done by the Republican committee here that said, Friends of Angelo is the name of this report, Friends of Angelo, countrywide systemic and successful effort to buy influence and block reform. On page 38, paragraph 3, it says, fees were also waived for Postmaster General John Potter. Potter benefited from an encounter with Mazzillo in 2003. Potter was in the process of arranging a, quote, complicated, unquote, bridge loan when he, quote, coincidentally, end quote, ran into Mazzillo. Mazzillo instructed Countrywide's Kay Gerfen to, quote, let Potter know that we/CW, which I take it to be Countrywide, will take care of it, end quote. Mazzillo instructed Perry to, quote, take 1 point off, end quote, Potter's rate and to charge, quote, no extra fees, end quote. Potter was referred to Mazzillo and/or the VIP program by former Fannie Mae Chief Executive Jim Johnson. In an email that was issued, it was written in May 21st, 2003, sent by Kay Gerfen of Countrywide. Let me read that. It says, coincidentally, Angelo just ran into Mr. Jack Potter, parentheses, Postmaster General, and parentheses. And Mr. Potter will be calling on Friday. Angelo wanted to make sure you were given a heads up to, quote, let Mr. Potter know we/CW will take care of it, end quote. Also, per Angelo, quote, take 1 point off and no extra fees, deal a little complicated, bridge loan, ... end quote. Please let Angelo know as soon as you hear from Mr. Potter. Thank you. In light of this, I need to ask if you knew about this, did you accept the loan, and do you feel like you were given favor by Countrywide through this encounter?
Well, first, I do have a loan from Countrywide. I believe that the terms of my loan were the result of a good credit history and my financial position and the fact that I was buying and purchasing a home and putting over half of the money down in cash. And the discussions were strictly between myself and Countrywide. Were all about the loan. There was no linkage to any expectations of official acts or anything to do with a relationship with any elected officials that has been,
My understanding is the Inspector General has started an investigation. Are you willing to cooperate with the investigation as completely as possible by turning over all documents, consent to an interview or deposition with the investigators, and are you willing to make other people or help and assist with other people with knowledge of the terms of the loan available for the Inspector General's office?
yes.
How much did you save by taking a discounted loan?
Again, I think the terms of my loan was consistent with my credit history.
How were you, what was the nature of you actually coming in contact? In fact, you were referred to Countrywide's VIP program by former Fannie Mae CEO Jim Johnson's, correct? How did that come about?
Well, at the time, Jim Johnson was the co-chair of the President's Commission on the United States Postal Service. So Jim Johnson was working with us as chairman of that committee during that period of time.
And did Johnson indicate to you that you should expect preferential treatment, discounts from Countrywide?
No, Johnson indicated to me that because he and I had a discussion, he had overheard me having a discussion with somebody, and he basically came up to me and said, "Oh, congratulations, you're buying a house." I had told him that at the time of the discussion that I hadn't closed yet, that I had made an offer, and he told me that we had a long discussion about how long I was going to work as Postmaster General, how long I anticipated being in the home. He suggested to me that I consider a 723 loan. He also suggested to me that I consider using Countrywide, which is a group that provided him with a loan.
And you'll cooperate fully then with the Inspector General's investigation?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and while I appreciate your purchasing a new house, let me try to get down to the post office and what we might be able to do about it. We know that we've got serious problems, and we've gone over and over those. I appreciate the cost-cutting approaches that you have developed within the system. I appreciate the proposals that have been made. I appreciate the approaches to streamlining the operations. Of course, I still get people who complain that they don't get what they would hope that they could get, which leads me to the point of recognizing that whatever it is that we get, we've got to pay for it one way or another. I'm reminded of Frederick Douglass, who said he knew one thing if he didn't know anything else, and that is that in this world we may not get everything that we pay for, but we most certainly will pay for everything that we get. I'm trying to, some of us believe that H.R. 22 is one way of effectuating some short-term fix for some of the problems that currently exist. Let's say if we, for some reason, were not successful in passing this legislation, within the next 2 years, what would you predict the Postal Service would be forced into or would have to do to try and make ends meet?
Congressman, that's a very difficult question. The key for us right now is volume. And I believe that we have to pull out all the stops when it comes to growing volume. I think that we have lost, for example, 20% of our advertising mail in each of the last 2 months. I believe that that's going to come back because if you look at advertising in general, it's down. So what we need to do is we need to get past this downturn in the economy. We need to understand how much of mail volume will come back. There's no doubt that some of the mail lost will not come back. We'll have to step up our efforts to save money. We've planned to save $5.9 billion this year. We plan and have a plan to save another almost $4 billion next year. And the reason that we can't do it all at once is because of the fact that it does take time to make adjustments in staffing. I do think that we face, the most critical thing we face this year is we're going to run out of money. And so, we're going to have to decide which bill not to pay. I intend to pay the salaries of our employees. We may have to forego paying the Treasury, part of what we owe for Retiree Health Benefit Trust Fund. We would, then be faced with, again, the thing that we've put on the table is the notion that we can only cost cut but so much. We have to get at some point at the structural aspects of our business. The reason we talk about moving from 6-day to 5-day delivery is because our costs there's a variability in costs that we can manage. Fixed costs we cannot. So this year, we have volume that's down some 12% year to date. We have taken out 15% in our mail processing costs because of the variability in that operation. We've taken out 12% in our post office costs to match the decline in volume. But we cannot and have not been able to take it out of delivery costs, because if you have the cost of going to every door every day, it's in a sense fixed. The only variable is how much time the carrier spends casing mail. And so that's the dilemma, and that's why we proposed and think we need to explore how do you take and make structural changes that will have minimal impact on the American public and the users of the mail, but at the same time enable us to lower our costs.
Let me just say that I appreciate your optimism relative to the ability to grow volume. I just don't see how you're going to be able to do it. As a matter of fact, we are increasing the use of electronic communication as opposed to decreasing it. I wish you well. But
Well, if I could, okay.
I'm sorry, the gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first ask a quick question on the separate from the structural problems. Isn't it, as far as the deficit that you're running in the relationship to income and so on, isn't it always been true in the post office that the money is made right after a postal rate increase and you show profits, and then towards the point where you're going to do a next postal rate increase, you tend to show losses? Isn't that the historic pattern?
That was the historic pattern. It was addressed in the Postal Act of 2006, and the change that was made was we went to annual price increases, smaller annual price increases, versus we were on a 3-year cycle of very large increases. And so the law addressed that. A lot of customers were very concerned about what you just described, the fact that we had these peaks and valleys, and there was major impact on the use of the mail in a year when we had double-digit price increases.
So you're saying that the loss that you currently have is predominantly somewhat structural, but also the reason it's more severe because you couldn't annually adjust because business dropped so fast?
Well, exactly. And if you think about us as a service institution versus manufacturing, and manufacturing, when demand goes down, what you end up with is a lot more inventory. A lot of cars in lots that were produced at the same productivity. In the service sector, you can't adjust service because the demand changes on any given day. And so we've been trying to chase the decline in demand and adjust service to those lower levels of demand. And so it created a gap. It's a productivity gap. And we're constantly trying to bring that in line. Where we have not been able to do it, as I just said, is delivery.
I just wanted to make sure that the record understands that the correlation between income and loss is not exactly the same as it is in the financial institutions or in others because of what you just described, which is somewhat of a change from the rate. But there's a structural problem that Mr. Davis just referred to, and that is that the whole changing way people communicate and so on. And I have two specific things I want to quickly run by you. One, probably the most, other than limiting a day of delivery, the closing smaller post offices, it seems to me, which is also a jobs question, but a window access, but also a prestige question coming from a small town myself. It seems to me in the age of computer technology, as we look at the centers like in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I'm from, that have very automated, that we ought to be able to program to keep people's identity. Small towns are losing their schools, they're losing everything else, and this is just unbelievably political pressure, at least for the identity of smaller communities who get absorbed. And I just would like your comment on that. And the second question is that as we watch daily newspapers collapse at an amazing rate right now, and as a former retailer myself, and if you pull Saturday delivery and we lose daily newspapers, for example, R. Donnelly has a huge facility in my district. How do they get things to people in a timely fashion when weekends are the biggest sales period? That it seems to me that as you structurally look at this, somehow merging some delivery systems, communication systems. I mean, that means, do you have to deliver in the morning rather than later in the day? Do newspapers have to adjust from a Sunday to a Saturday? That habits are nice and patterns are nice, but the technology is changing so much. We could watch you getting hammered and restricted tremendously at the same time newspapers are going out. And how do we communicate and keep our structure moving is how we move goods in the United States.
Well, first let me address the question of community identity. Our systems, our zip code-based systems are strictly geography-based. It's usually a 5-digit zip code, geography-based. But we have changed our systems to allow numerous names for cities, towns, or geography within zip codes. So there is flexibility within our system to allow that. It's more rigid when it comes to zip codes because of we don't have an infinite amount of zip codes, and so we have to be careful when it comes to that. So
7-digit wouldn't allow you to expand that?
well, there is the discussion. Right now we have 9-digit zip
9,
codes,
that's what I was
and we could
5 is
literally carve pieces of that out. And as a result of that, we've enabled communities to use their community name as an alternate to what might be the name of the formal town. And so we allow multiple names within a geographic area. But there are segments of the country where we are out of zip codes. Now, regarding delivery, as I said earlier, we're reaching out to everybody, all the stakeholders. It's not a fact that we would eliminate Saturday, but we do need to have flexibility there. Sorry, Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Let's see. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Potter, we recognize that there were certain delivery routes, such as those in more rural areas. We realize those apparently had to be contracted out. We're concerned with the more widespread implementation of that practice. Has the Postal Service expanded its contracting out of letter carriers, and if so, can you prove that it has resulted in cost savings?
Congressman, we can prove that contracting out of delivery is less expensive than using postal employees. We do have and have stopped contracting out delivery in city areas and in most rural areas. The reason is not because it's less expensive, but because of this downturn in the economy and the lack of volume. Bottom line is, right now we're in a position where we have too many folks. And so
so in other words, you had too many folks that you were contracting out to? Is that
no,
what
we have too many postal employees. So today we still have, despite the fact that we have a downturn in the economy, we have a growth of about 1 million addresses a year, over 1 million addresses a year. Those new addresses are largely being delivered to by career employees. And we have an excess number of employees that we're downsizing. So it would make no sense in this time to begin contracting out or expand contracting out.
Talk to me about this whole doing away of, we've talked about this before, this doing away with delivery on Saturday. I mean, is that something that's real? I mean, I've heard it before, and then it seems like everybody gets upset, and then next thing you don't hear about it for a while. Talk to me about that, and I know you before the Senate, you again advocated for that change, and to be frank with you, and you know this, the public wants Saturday delivery, and what can we do to maintain it?
First of all, let me assure you that being a career employee and coming from a postal family, I did not make that, request lightly. I took it very seriously. I'm very concerned about the future health of the Postal Service. We're working very hard with our unions and management associations to try and streamline our operations. The real key here going forward is, do we have enough source of revenue to support the posts? And we're looking at all options. We're even looking around the world to see how are they doing it. Some places, posts are banks, and that's how posts are earning money to help pay for the services that are provided in terms of hard copy delivery. So as far as but we're precluded by law from exploring other forms of revenue. So I think if we put everything on the table, everything there is, including product, choices, how we run our plants, that we might find a way to get there. But the overall key is that there's a decline in mail volume. If that continues, whether it's next year or 5 years from now, we are going to have to face the need to structurally change something. And the most obvious place, unfortunately, is in delivery.
What have you done to try to increase revenue? Anything?
Oh, well, we have a number of things. One is we've offered rates and we've opened up our system to others to use our system for delivery. So our biggest, believe it or not, package customers are UPS and FedEx. Basically, we'll give them access to our system. We have click and ship, where people can get online at home, pay for postage, print out a label, put it on the package, we pick it up. We're offering pickup service now. FedEx UPS, we have an experiment to do that. In the ad category, ad mail area, we're offering and working with customers to come up with new pricing schemes to incent volume growth. Bottom line is we're making our products much more effective than they have been. We're adding a barcode we're introducing a new barcode on mail.
All right, let me ask you this last question because I
Sure.
want to obey the chairman's orders. This HR 22, what is that you consider that to be a solution? Is that a long-term solution? And what do you like so much about it?
It's a short-term solution. What I like about it,
HR 22.
HR 22 is a short-term solution for us. It doesn't, won't overcome the longer-term issue that I just described. I like the fact that it's an 8-year bill and that we can plan for 8 years what our costs are going to be for retiree health benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Potter, the GAO, and I'm going to read to you what it said, noted that you and the Postal Service had made unprecedented cost cuts over the years. But then it went on to say, given the growing gap between revenues and expenses, the USPS's business model and its ability to remain self-financing may be in jeopardy. I want to ask you now rather than later, because this creeping problem could creep the Postal Service out of existence. Do you believe that the Postal Service should totally rethink its business model? Have you given any thought to that in the form it would take? And do you believe the Postal Service can sustain itself as a self-financing entity as the 1970 statute made the service?
Congresswoman, I believe that we can do that we can be a self-sustaining organization for a long time to come.
On the present business model?
Not on the present business model. I believe that we are going to have to make changes, whether that's the frequency of delivery, whether that's the type of products that we can offer. I think that everything has to be on the table, including the mix of our workforce. We are not in a position today, looking forward, where we can sit still. The sooner we act, the better off we'll be, and the more viable we will be. The one thing the biggest trap I think we have is that we don't act quickly enough, and we create a financial burden.
If I may ask, Mr. Potter, that's my problem about quickly enough. So you've suggested we may have to go from 6 days to 5 days. This sounds like an incremental approach rather than a business model approach. If one looked at the entire business model, it might be that you came out not with, for example, going from 6 to 5 days. Who knows? But if everything's on the table, my question is it on the table? Who is doing the rethinking of the business model? When can this subcommittee expect to get some evidence of thinking on a new business model?
I if that's an invitation, we'll gladly fill
If
it.
not you, you surely wouldn't want people who are not ensconced in the business of the Postal Service like ourselves to be the first to come forward and take a hack at it. And I use the word hack very advisedly. Because the moment anything gets cut, every member of Congress, including those who most don't want to spend money on anything, will say, you sure can't do that in my community. But I looked at your press conference. I asked you about 6 to 5 days because, again, that seems to me to be more of the same. And thinking it through in that way seems to me dismembers parts of the body piece by piece rather than looking at the body and its core and seeing what can be left standing. In your press release of March 20th, you talk about aggressive steps to cut costs. You talked about offering another round of early retirement, and then you spoke about positions that you expect to save funds from. Now, staff positions at the district level nationwide, 1,400 processing supervisor and management positions. Are these positions, are these layoffs? Will layoffs occur? Have they occurred?
There will be a reduction in force according to OPM
So there will be
rules.
layoffs.
There will, at the end, there could be. But we hope to be able to offer everyone a job.
And let me ask you about early retirement. Have postal employees been quick to take early retirement when they see the condition of the Postal Service?
We've had, I believe, some 9,000 people take advantage of the early
How many were
retirement.
offered or expected to take early retirement?
That was a little bit above what was expected. It was well over 100,000 people who were offered.
It does seem to me if one is talking about big reductions that could come, given the business model. Let me just ask you: is there another round of early retirement that might be offered? If so, what kind of cost does that entail relative to keeping these people on board?
We've just opened up voluntary early retirement to all postal employees through the end of this year. And so when people are being told that their positions are eliminated, they have an opportunity to either seek a different position and/or they have the option of retiring if they're eligible.
I think that's a very important thing you're doing that way. I do think people know how to take care of themselves, and they can see the business model just like we can, and they know that you've been trying. If it's not done one way, it may do another way that really hurts the Postal Service. Got to keep as many people employed as we must have in order to deliver the mail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for conducting this hearing. Mr. Potter, thank you for being here today. You know, I understand that you're looking at a huge deficit within the Postal Service in the coming years, and I understand the proposal to reduce service from 6 days to 5. What would be the savings to go from 6 days to 5 days? How much would that save?
$3.5 billion
Annually?
annually.
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 Is that right? Okay. How have your in industries like the auto industry, labor and management have found a newfound friendship or relationship? How is that relationship with management and labor in the Postal Service? Is it does everybody has everyone come to the table and said, okay, we know we're going to have to do some belt tightening? Is that pretty healthy relationship?
Well, I've always had a healthy relationship with our unions and management associations, and we've been meeting on a regular basis now that we face this crisis. And everything is being discussed. It's on the table. We've made a number of changes. Probably the most prominent example is in delivery. We work with the NALC to expedite changes in routes with the rural carriers. We have a count that's going on right now. We have talked at our last meeting, which was it was last Friday. We had a discussion, and we're talking about working enabling people to move from job to job more easily because we have some pockets of need and some places we're overstaffed. So we're working through to try and get at both efficiency as well as making sure we're accommodating employees.
And so the labor community understands what the Postal Service is confronted with, and they
Without
want
a
to work
doubt.
with you.
Without a doubt.
Wonderful. Are there any advances in technology on the horizon for the Postal Service to help reduce costs, and are there any new ideas to grow the business?
We're deploying, as we speak, the next generation of flat sorting equipment, which will enable us to put mail into walk sequence, flat mail, catalogs, magazines, and oversized envelopes into walk sequence for delivery. That'll make that operation much more efficient. We are also introducing a next generation of barcode, which will enable us to actually count mail as it's sorted as opposed to accepting it. And again, it'll eliminate some steps and make the mail more efficient for us to handle, and it'll be more transparent to customers, so they'll have a window into how we're processing the mail. So there are a lot of innovations in terms of, that are on the table that are being implemented to get the Postal Service into the 21st century.
Let me hear what your if you could, or your wish list for a long-term fix to the retiree health benefit. What would that be, or are you will to give that?
Well, if it was my wish list, I would like to just revisit this whole notion of the pace at which we pay into the Retiree Health Benefit Trust Fund. There's no other organization I'm aware of in America that has the requirement that we have. If we were under GAAP principles, we would not be paying into this trust fund. I understand the need to do it, but at a time when we're financially strapped, if this was the private sector, we would not make that contribution this year. We would pass on it. The payments that we're making into that fund are not tied into an actuarial kind of analysis. It was really a holdover from payments that we were making into the Civil Service Retirement Fund. So I would much prefer, I'd love H.R. 22 and I want it to pass, but if you had to step back, I think we should rethink the way we're paying into this, and there would be more of a benefit for the Postal Service in the short run if we did.
And your costs are higher than other federal employees, about 10% higher.
No, they're about the same, but we're the only ones that have that pre-funding mechanism.
Now, just as a informal survey that I conducted among Postal Service employees, they indicate to me that they would prefer to have the day that you eliminate for service would be Saturday and not Monday. Just to share that.
I like my weekends off too.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Parr, because of the interest in all of the issues here, we're going to ask you to stay for one more round of questioning. And let me begin that by asking you, we're hearing your plan, which is, we're going to slash service possibly from 6 to 5 days at a significant burden to the customer. We're going to close post offices. We've already closed 6 administrative facilities. We're going to get rid of 150,000 employees. And then after all that, you're projecting we're going to lose $6 billion. If that is the future here, if that is the future next year, do you think you deserve a bonus for that performance?
My incentive is based on performance parameters that are agreed to with the Board of Governors at the beginning of a year. Based on where I stand year to date, in terms of our financial position, I would not get a performance bonus this year or incentive payment this year.
Okay.
And I'm working very hard because I would just like to mention that all of our administrative employees, our managers, our supervisors, are tied into a national performance assessment program. Their pay, whether they get a raise or whether they get any kind of an incentive pay in any year, is tied to the bottom line of the Postal Service. So, I mean, I don't want to be cavalier about this. It's extremely important that we work hard to do well so that not that I can earn a performance incentive, but that those folks on the front line actually get a pay increase.
I
and I
understand
think
that.
that's a great motivating tool for our institution.
Just wanted to be clear on that. HR 22. I mean, the fact that it's sponsored by Mr. Davis of Illinois and Mr. McHugh of New York, two guys who I admire greatly and respect their opinion, I'm inclined to be receptive of that. But I also looked at numbers that said that if we do that, if we pay the premiums out of the trust fund rather than putting $5 billion a year into the trust fund, that down the line, not very long, 2017, we end up with $75 billion in unfunded liability for health benefits for my postal employees. I don't want to face that. So, you know, are we under the same impression that that's what's going to happen under this scenario?
HR 22 will have us continue to pay $5.4 to $5.6 billion into the trust fund each of the next 8 years. It relieves us of the burden of paying for retiree health benefits directly in each of those 8 years. The monies come out of the trust fund. The trust fund will grow in each of those years. After that point in time, there will be a determination around what the requirements, the future requirements of the fund are, and those costs will be amortized, I believe, over a 40-year period of time. So I believe that the mechanism that is laid out in the current law and the proposal that's put forth by HR 22 has the double benefit of protecting our people as well as giving us short-term relief.
Let me just say for the record, I'm not there yet. I'm open to it. I've seen some numbers that concern me about what's going to happen to my postal employees in 2017. And I don't want to be holding the bag to the tune of $75 billion for their health benefits, stone cold, in 2017, looking at that problem.
I appreciate the opportunity to come back and
talk. Let's do that.
Talk with you about that.
All right. The last thing is, I do have some familiarity with the Postal Service, and I recognize that in your last early retirement incentive, it had no incentive. It was just an early out, voluntary early retirement. And you're looking to get rid of 150,000 people. That's not going to happen if you have the same plan you had last time. You almost added employees in your early retirement program with no incentive. Is there going to be any incentive for, look at the economy. Look at the economy. You think people are going to go out the door when everything is so precarious? I'm just wondering, are you going to offer any type of incentive to any of these employees? I realize you've got some employees who would not be eligible because of the importance of their positions, but will there be any attempt to offer any incentive to get people out the door?
It's under consideration, but we have over 120,000 people who are currently eligible to retire. We also have 150,000 who will be offered voluntary early retirement. When we say that we are going to reduce 150,000 people, it's the equivalent of 150,000 people. That includes overtime. We have employees, non-career employees, who we can let go today as we speak, with 30,000 fewer career employees than we were this time last year, 10,000 non-career. So we have the flexibility to do that. We have a flexibility to take our part-time flexible employees and only work them 4 hours every 2 weeks. Believe me, there's enough flexibility in our system to accomplish what you described. But that's not to say that every option isn't on the table and we wouldn't consider bonuses, incentives to go sometime in the future, but we don't need that today.
Okay, I'm violating my own rule. Chair recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Chaffetz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few years ago, the President's Commission on the U.S. Postal Service made a number of recommendations. One of those recommendations was to a Postal Network Optimization Commission, somewhat similar to a sort of a BRAC commission that was done on military bases. Is this something you're supportive of, something you want to see done? Why wasn't it done? With 34,000 postal facilities, is this something we should be doing, and where is it on your list of priorities?
The BRAC commission concept, as I understood it back then, was focused on our mail processing plant network. And it also probably could apply to our post office network. The thing that makes us a little different than the approach in the BRAC commission is that we have to serve every community in America. So we have to be in every location. Our plants have to be, within a reasonable reach of each of our post offices. So there is, by its very nature, a network that exists, and it doesn't lend itself, in my opinion at the time, did not lend itself to some analysis at a national level. And so, in effect, you could have it at the state and local level with state and local politicians, but not necessarily something that really made sense to me at the time.
So do you think we're at the optimal level now, or do you
So I think we're going to continue to evolve. I think the number of discussions that were talked about here today when it comes to, the future of delivery. Well, to me, delivery is tied to demand. And so if the demand today means that we go to every house 6 days a week, fine. Or if it's lower, it goes to 5. At some point, it might go to 3. I do think we need to evolve. I think our plant network has evolved and will continue to evolve. We do and have been consolidating operations. I'm open to, if it's a BRAC commission or some other group coming in, taking a look at the data and making recommendations, we'd look at them.
You're not doing anything internally right now to look at some of the consolidation or closing?
We're constantly looking at that.
Constantly.
Constantly looking at that. We're constantly closing facilities. As I said earlier, we're consolidating, moving mail from one facility to another facility where it makes sense. For example, less mail is put into mailboxes every day. So we have fewer facilities today that cancel mail and sort mail for the world than did, 10 years ago.
Okay. Let me, time is short here. You mentioned with 150,000 employees nationwide that given the opportunity to take early retirement, how many do you expect that would actually take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, I would expect that maybe in the neighborhood of 10 to 15,000.
10 to 15,000.
But you also have 120,000 people who are eligible to retire and who will retire over time.
Are you taking a firm commitment to say we're making a recommendation to move to 5-day service, or are you just saying that's on the table at this point?
What I'm saying is that, given what I know today, that we have to make a structural change. The one that makes most sense to me is to give the Board of Governors the flexibility to move from 6-day to 5-day delivery. I think that they will exercise their judgment on whether or not we need to move to that in its entirety, whether we would do that. As I said at the Senate, I had proposed to do that during our light volume periods. And that's where this whole thing began. And one of the senators asked me, does that mean that you're only asking for the summer period? I said, no. We want to have the flexibility given to the Board of Governors, people who are presidentially appointed, Senate approved, to make that change as necessary to assure the financial stability of the Postal Service.
Do you believe that would be a permanent change, or?
I think once made, it would be.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's see. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't take 5 minutes because I don't believe that you can actually get blood out of a turnip.
Want a turnip?
I think you can slice it, you can dice it, you can puree it, you can saute it, you can squeeze it, you can tease it, and you still end up with turnip juice. But we were about to explore just for a moment your optimism relative to the ability to grow volume. And I was saying that it was difficult for me to see any room, any possibility. Could you?
Well, let me just say that the Postal Service is in a number of markets. So one of the products that we have is an advertising product. When I say grow, I'm talking about growing from where we are today. If 20% of advertising mail went away, which it has, and by the way, it's reflective of what's going on in the marketplace for advertising. If people now want to make investments in advertising, I think that mail is going to be a channel that they're going to consider. Prior to this downturn in the economy, our market share of advertising dollars, total advertising dollars that were spent on mail, had been growing. Why? Because People were looking to have the ability to target different customers, and they wanted measurability, and mail is very measurable. And so my belief is that as the economy comes back, advertising mail will grow again. Will it get back to the levels it was before the economy went down? I hope so. But I know it's going to grow beyond where it is today. Likewise, packages. Our package business is down. When I do a comparison of where we are versus the competition and look at what's the impact of the downturn in the economy on their revenues, we're very comparable. I don't think there's anyone in this room who doesn't think that as the economy comes back, our competition's packages and their volume won't grow. So I have faith that our market share will be maintained as volume grows. The one area that, Congressman, where we have a real problem is first-class mail. It's transactional in nature. It's bill presentment, bill payment. Once someone goes online and begins to pay bills online, they're not going to come back to the Postal Service because, you know, of the very nature of you know, once you have that habit, you're not going to do it. So when I talk about growth, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those categories of mail where we have a natural strength in the marketplace. And I believe that we will bounce back in those areas. Even first-class mail. We were declining in first-class mail about 3 to 5% per year in terms of volume. Well, we're down over 10%. And I believe that the difference between 3 and 5 and 10 is largely driven by the economy. When the economy comes back, we may see an uptick in first-class mail. And so that's what I'm talking about, growth. And I'm talking about competing in certain sectors and growing our market share.
Well, let me thank you very much, because I, like Chairman Lynch, don't want to be left holding the bag in 2017, even if it's a mail bag. So I hope that we are indeed able to make these ideas work, and I thank you very much, Mr. Potter, for your testimony.
I thank the gentleman. Chairman recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
You know, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I'm just listening to you, and I'm trying to make sure I'm making heads or tails of this. Let's go to your salary. I'm not going to beat you up on your salary. You don't have to worry about that. But the 66, you telling me that $66,000 of your what they say is your compensation. You don't pay tax. It's security. Is that right?
Yes.
Where are they securing you from? I mean, they worry about you. Who is that mandated?
Well, I can tell you when it started. I can tell you when it started. It started when we were after we came under attack from anthrax.
Okay.
And I was somewhere, and my chief inspector got a call from someone, and I think it might have been the Secret Service.
But you certainly you don't pay taxes on that.
No.
Okay.
No. But it's considered for some reason compensation. You know.
And give me the other pieces of it, of the compensation.
The other piece is the salary, and then the other piece is I'm a 31-year postal employee.
And okay, you went through
and my
that formula.
3-year high is going up because I got a salary increase, and
So-
that's almost half of the money they're talking about, because they're projecting, you know, my age, I'll live to 80-something, and here's how much money you'll get over those years.
Okay, let me go back to this. You know, when we look at all the methods of communicating today over the internet and what have you, clearly, and you've testified to this, that's cut a substantial amount of your business. Are we using, Mr. Potter, are we taking full advantage of our advances in technology and within the postal system? Are there things that we could do to cut our costs further? And that's number one. And number two, when we look at the whole idea of this Saturday service, and I can tell you, I would bet everything I've got that that's not going to happen. Just cutting the Saturday service. So you might want to take that off the table. But let me ask you this: have we figured out which part of that is? I mean, how do you figure out what your savings? In other words, is most of your savings from people actually going, our delivery people delivering the mail, and I'm thinking if the volume is still the same, I'm trying to figure out, you know, while they may be delivering Monday through Friday, if the volume is still the same, there's certain manpower that goes into preparing the mail to be delivered. And I'm just trying to figure out how do you make that divide and what percentage? You following my question?
I understand exactly what
Okay.
you're saying. So today, over 90% of the mail that a carrier brings out on the street, letter mail, is sorted by a machine into walk sequence. So they don't come into the office anymore and case every letter. And so we're down to the point where less than 2 hours of a carrier's day is spent in the office preparing mail to go out on the street. So that's the letter side. We're automating the flat side. That's coming next. And so when you look at the savings associated with not delivering mail on any day of the week, it's having over 200,000 people leave an office and go out on the street, driving to their delivery, and then, you know, spending the day on their route. We do recognize that some sorting that would have gone on the morning of the day that we eliminate will have to move to the next day. So we account for the fact that that occurs. We also account for the fact in our cost savings that rural carriers on the sixth day, the rural routes, excuse me, are covered by rural carrier relief folks who make less money than our career people. And so we recognize that the career people are the ones working 5 days a week. Now, part of what drives us is what does the American public think? And there have been a number of surveys of the American public. And when it comes to the future and mail, really we should be responding to the American public. And what they're saying by the Rasmussen poll and a Gallup poll is that they'd much prefer to have, you know, lesser frequency of delivery than they would have pay additional postage. You know, pay for the fact that our costs are going up because we're so labor intensive. And ultimately, that's who I think, you know, we have to respond to. And so, believe me, it's I don't take that step lightly at all. You know, again, I grew up in a postal family, and you know, I'm not popular these days because I'm out there talking about it. But if the choice is mail delivery in the future or no mail delivery, I think you have to say, let's make the changes so we can assure that we reach every home in America. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from District of Columbia, Miss Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Mr. Potter, I am particularly interested in the health care costs, and I note again that you've proposed that over an 8-year period, the statutory mandate that we imposed a few years back to pre-fund annuitants health care should be relieved. Now, the GAO says that it would prefer 2 years, but that neither option may do much for the Postal Service. In what way do you think this would fix the problem, the overall problem of the Postal Service? And if not pre-funded, how would you make up for the funding of the annuitants?
Well, let me clarify again. Right now, this year we're required to pay $7.4 billion for retiree health benefits. That's well over 10% of the revenues that we take in. And so the relief that we're seeking is the $2 billion. We'll continue to pay, according to, as proposed by H.R. 22, we'll continue to pay into the trust fund, $5.4 to $5.6 billion a year for 8 years. That's more money going into the trust fund than would come out to pay for the $2 billion.
So you don't think it would have any effects then?
No, I think the effect would be that the obligation for the Postal Service in future years beyond 2016 will be greater to contribute to retiree health benefits than it is today. But I would say that we are paying too much today, that we're not paying a fair share, that we're paying much too much. And so I think what's offered is...
The GAO says 2 years so that we can rethink this notion. This goes back to my business model question. Do you think that we all need to sit down and think the entire model before jumping to one big cut like that? One big change, I'm sorry, like that?
Well, personally, I believe that H.R. 22 has the short-term benefit of getting us through the year and enabling us to pay our bills, and it helps us in subsequent years to do that. I do think that you're on a parallel path, though, that we need that as well as the discussion that you just described about, you know, we need to look at all of our options, we need to come up with a plan, and we need to execute it. Again, I think in timing, the timing of when we execute it is based on the anticipated demand for postal services. So,
And I know we can't predict the future, and incremental death is a pretty terrible death. So, again, I'm looking for a way to deal with the problem. That is to say, short term, yes, but then to look at its consequences. And I hear what you're saying and understand it. How green is the Postal Service? You do a lot of, perhaps as much as anyone in the country, of traveling by motor. Would you tell us how you are conserving, if you are conserving fuel, and how you are conserving it?
well, first, when it comes to fuel, right-hand drive, I mean, we've changed our delivery routes to make sure that we have as many right-hand turns in there as possible.
How often do you buy new vehicles?
Well, we haven't bought vehicles in some 17 years.
You haven't what?
We haven't bought, we have a fleet. Our fleet of vehicles is some 17 years old. We are very anxious to take that fleet, modernize that fleet, and
So if one goes down, it's just down, and you don't replace it?
no, we have aluminum body vehicles. We have added some vans to that fleet as deliveries have grown. But we bought a special vehicle.
What fuel are those that
Right now they're gasoline.
Why?
Well, because of the fact that, well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is that up until last year, we were limited in terms of alternate fuel vehicles that we could consider. Hybrids and the like, we were not given credit for in the, you know, from the federal government. That law has now since been changed, so I thank you all for doing that.
We're not giving credit for, what do you mean by not giving credit for?
Well, we were required to have a certain percentage of our fleet be alternate fuel vehicles. The definition of what an alternate fuel vehicle was very narrow. We worked with the Department of Energy and with the folks up here on the Hill and Congressman Davis and others to get that definition expanded so that we could consider other types of vehicles. Right now we are testing, as we speak, hydrogen fuel vehicles, gas-powered fuel vehicle, you know, natural gas vehicles. We're testing a number of different alternatives.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask you if you would allow this witness to submit to you an inventory of the complement of vehicles they have now based on precisely what form of fuel they use, so we can get a sense of that?
I'd also be proud to submit with that, Congresswoman, all of our activities in terms of going green, because we have a very good racket, and I'd like to do it justice by submitting that as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we can work that out. I know that you did present a vehicle count inventory, but I don't think it was broken down as Ms. Norton would like. So perhaps you could just look through that and get the information to the committee
We'll be happy to
as
do
soon
that.
as possible. Okay, Mr. Potter, I have no further questions. I want to thank you for your attendance here, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
As you probably heard, we have some votes currently on the floor. I understand there are at least 3 in this series, which probably means we will not be back for about, at a minimum, a half hour, probably a little bit longer. So everybody's welcome to stretch your legs, and we'll be back, like I say, in about 30 to 40 minutes.